Hello, this is Lawrence Master speaking in for Post University's Project Management 2 class. In Unit 7, what we're going to be getting into is team dynamics, communications, and organization. With team dynamics, what we're talking about is pretty much the process that occurs in teams joining, making connections, and actually working as a team. And that process is basically known as the forming, storming, norming, and performing stage. In the forming stage, team members, of course, get assigned by their manager, or if it's in an academic setting, by an instructor. And when they first start out, there's a pretty good sense of team, but they're not really doing anything yet. When we get to storming, what we typically find is we may have some personal agendas and conflicts, and the sense of team is not really there, and nothing is really getting done, which is probably the most challenging part of getting a team together, is getting through that storming stage. In the norming part, once we pass the storming part, we're going to go ahead and start to see a rise in both the team performance and sense of team. And finally, the performing stage, that's really our end game. We want to try to get everyone involved in doing their jobs, having a good sense of team, and performing at their peak. And the big question you got to be asking yourself is, what can you do to make sure that your members are going to get to the performing stage? And some of the things we can do is making sure the team members are physically close to each other, preferably in the same building, and even more importantly, within the same work group. Um, Making sure that responsibilities are well defined as a project manager, being able to juggle multiple items and having a good sense of humor and having good rapport with your teammates is going to be critical. So in this figure right here, what we're seeing is this process again: forming, storming, norming, and performing. It is a fairly sequential process as depicted here. However, you may get to a point where you're norming and you may even be performing, but you need to make sure that you maintain performance and you don't slide back to storming. So that's the critical part here. And this is another diagram which is fairly illustrative of what I'm trying to convey. Looking at this in sense of team and performance. Again, like I mentioned, in the beginning you have a sense of team, but you're not really doing anything. And then in the storming phase, not a lot is getting accomplished as well, because there may be infighting, and there's conflict resolution that needs to occur. But once you pass that and you find your formula on how to get your group to click, you will see your team starting to norm, and that's where you'll get a lot of progress, and you'll level off at a certain plateau. And when you start to level off, that's really considered your performing. That is the most that you'll get out of that work group. um, and so this model is very helpful for you as a project manager to be aware that there is a process in having teams work together, especially when the team members are new to each other and don't have a history. Moving on to project communications and documentations, I think a lot of project managers can do better in this area. Many project managers do rely on verbal communication. That is okay, but that is no substitute for getting your message out in writing and having it all documented. Now, some of the key communication pieces that you need to be aware of as a project manager is having your project status review meetings and having your customer review meetings. Those are very important. And many times project managers tend to mix the customer into the team member project review meetings, and that may not be such a good idea. So just keep in mind that it is a best practice to do have your dedicated customer review meetings to focus on customer issues, and having team meetings to focus on the mechanics of what's going right and what's going wrong with your project. You also want to develop action items as a result of your project status review meetings or your customer review meetings, and also deliver project progress reports. So here's an example of a rather generic project status review meeting. They're talking about accomplishments since the last meeting is a really great way of opening up a project review meeting. So you get a sense of accomplishment and you get the momentum going. You also typically talk about risk assessment, corrective actions, and by no means this is what you have in every meeting, but notice on the right hand side you do have designated people that are responsible for updating the status. Now when we get into customer project review meetings, notice it's it's um, it's structured a little bit different. And what I want to key in on here is the proposed changes. Again, that's a great time to bring up a change to your project. This is an action items document. Typically, there's a bare minimum. You want to document your action, who is responsible, and by when they're responsible for doing it. Okay, it's important to be specific. The action should have a definite description and it should be quantitative. It should have a specific person assigned and it should have a due date. In terms of a project progress report, typically some of the things you want to have in that are accomplishments since the prior report, current status of your project performance, any cost overruns. That would be a great place to document that and plan corrective actions. So just remember, documentation is critical, and for a project manager, where you will spend most of your time is in documentation. Besides, of course, conducting meetings with your teams and addressing issues, the the deliverables of a project manager for the most part are project management documents. In addition, of course, to the coordination that he or she does to getting the job done. In regards to types of project organizations, what we're talking about is how an organization is set up. You get pretty much the three vanilla categories that are understood in the industry as functional, project-based, and matrix. Okay, for your functional organization is your typical manager-employee relationship where you have a group of employees reporting to a functional manager for line duties. In a project-based organization, you may find project managers that are overline managers, and that is due to the clear need to have resources managed and reporting up and through managers into a project manager. This is where your organization believes that the lifeblood of its mission is project based. It's not so much internal based, where you'd have the functional organization, and hence there's a strong need to be project oriented. In a matrix type of organization, uh, that is where you have kind of like the best of both breeds, so to speak. Employees are assigned to report to managers, but are using defined projects. And which one is best to use is kind of a challenging question to answer, and is really dependent on the specific organization. So in this example, this is an example of a functional organization. So apparently this is an electronics company, and the way it's decided to be organized is have a vice president and then managers beneath it in the typical upside down tree configuration. In a project organizational structure, notice here that the VPs are kind of out of the um, are in the chain of command. But what's interesting is the project manager may sit in between a VP and a manager, and hence control resources that would traditionally report to a manager. And again, that is for organizations that feel that projects are the lifeblood of its organization, and there is a need to have line managers and consultants and staff report up and through a project manager. Now, this is interesting. This is a matrix organizational structure. Notice in this case, we have the functional version of an organization where you have a president and VPs and managers and employees beneath them. For example, Jack is reporting to the project administration and a systems. You got Jim reporting to a systems engineering manager. But then if you look on your bottom left, you have a specific project manager reporting in to a president, and you have a whole row of individuals, Jack, Jim, Julie, and Kathy, that are attached to Project A. So, that each organizational structure has its pros and cons, and for the most part, the matrix structure has the most advantages. It typically allows for efficient utilization of resources, functional expertise available to all projects, increased learning and knowledge transfer, and customer focus. And that's just based on the ability to use a resource across the organization without political fights and without ownership of resources. Now, of course, some of the disadvantages is the dual reporting relationship. Having two masters to answer to is a challenge organizationally. So that needs to be worked out and carefully communicated. And how that dual reporting relationship gets reconciled is, should be determined up front. And there's also a need for balance of power. So that these are some of the advantages. In a functional structure, of course, you have no duplication of activities, and each unit is able to specialize and gain functional excellence. But again, there are disadvantages in that, and again, it really depends on the mission of the organization and how they can best reconcile, mitigate some of these disadvantages. And that's it for this unit. Thank you.